It's a test. Anyway, okay. I just want to sit down with you guys. So, the first topic, and then I'll shut up and let these smart guys talk, is JIRA governance. Okay, it's an issue for a lot of us, especially as our instances grow. And Dan, you at LinkedIn have a pretty big instance.
Yeah, it kind of grows in all directions. So we have a pretty big user base. It's over 10,000 users probably hitting the system. We have a couple million issues. We have a couple thousand projects, several hundred custom fields, and a handful of people to manage it. Less than probably on my hand. Fortunately, we tackle these things through kind of people, process, technology in each of those directions. So in every problem that we have of growth, we tend to pick one of those things and use that to govern our JIRA instance. Fortunately, I think we have the best people on the planet managing our JIRA instance right now, so it's in safe hands. But we have had to put in a lot of process and technology to make it happen as well, because growing it with, or governing it with people isn't scalable.
So how do you do that with such a small team? And you have all these users. I imagine it's multiple team types.
Yeah. So let me first tell you what we're using JIRA for, and that'll give some context on what we're using it for governance. So LinkedIn, we believe that we should just have one place to go for issue management. So you don't have multiple places where you log into JIRA and check for your bugs or where your seat is. JIRA is used for event planning at LinkedIn. It's also used to hail a cab. It's used to...
there's this thing called Uber, right?
Yeah. Well, I think well, I don't want to get into it, but yeah. I think someone hails the Uber when they get the ticket.
Yeah, okay.
But we also use it for development as well. Very, very heavy for development. And when you have everything in there, it's hard to optimize for any given use case. Also, two more interesting things that we use JIRA for. One is an engine to keep state of many different production errors as well. We have something called EKG that manages our deployment across all of LinkedIn for production and development. When it sees an application problem, it first checks if there's a ticket to address it, then creates a ticket, then follows up on it. And so you could imagine how hard that system could hit JIRA and bring it down. It's like machines taking down machines a lot of times. We also have a lot of facades on top of JIRA that the user sees, and they're interfacing on a web app, but what they don't realize is when they click submit, a bunch of stuff happens in JIRA. Not only does a ticket get filed, but a lot of workflow things kick off, a lot of machines get ordered, a lot of things get racked as well. And so we have to manage that as well, because a lot of times the query will hit JIRA a lot harder than we think. So the way that we manage those things is we've created a client called LinkedIn Python JIRA client, Lippy JIRA.
That's the name?
That's the name. Yeah. And so we've invested upfront a way for people to take our library and build stuff on top of. So when we have optimizations, we don't have to tell every developer, hey, your result set is too small, so every time you ask for something, you're asking too many requests. We just need to bump up the result set in one place, everyone gets it. So you change it one place and everyone gets it. Another thing is caching auth tokens. We don't have to take best practices in a wiki. We can just put it into the client. Everyone takes advantage of that as well. And you can see the goodness in the graphs really quickly when you deploy something like that. We also have throttling as well, and blacklisting and things like that as well. And I could go into details of that, but you guys know what that is. We also have a lot of process stuff, which is kind of interesting. Every time someone asks for a project, we don't automatically create it. I ask them a trillion questions. Sometimes people just wanted a component when they're asking for a project. Sometimes when someone says my component's not acting right, they really need a project. So sometimes we need to get involved, and our touch points are the process. So we have a page, go/new JIRA project. People go and look at it, then they have to create a meeting. They always moan and say, why don't you automate this? And then I meet with them and talk them through it, because ultimately there is some human interaction to make it successful. and you need to put process around that. You can't solve that through automation. So there's certain corner cases where you have to do process and people, but where you do automation, you try your best.
So, and we will take questions from the audience, so if you guys have questions, feel free to raise your hand and we'll get that to these guys. But I'm interested in, Dan, sort of one more question for you, then I might ask Mikey something, but you're spreading out this adoption across team types, like you're ordering cabs and planning events. So how do you get these other teams who aren't traditionally the type you think would use JIRA to now run their whole teams on JIRA?
Yeah, that's a journey, and it's really interesting because JIRA is kind of a representation of your whole company. Well, if you have your whole company adopted, it clearly is. And so there's places that are there's areas that are very technically savvy where they're like, hey, get out of the way, I have my JIRA client library, I'm good, don't talk to me. But then there's areas in purchasing where they're trying to, let's say, redefine their whole process, and they want JIRA as some of the answers, but they can't close the gap of where they are, where they want to be, and where JIRA is. And so we had a team that was just using email to communicate, and they really needed workflow, but they weren't sure how to do it. Little plug for ServiceRocket. Jay did a fantastic job, sat down with them for 2 days, created a project. Jay, why don't you stand up for a second?
All right,
so everyone can see
Jay.
you. Yeah. So, I mean, that's where having the best people in the world really helps, is when they come to you with, how do I use JIRA? You can push a ServiceRocket consultant in front of them and say, hey, why don't you just talk to them for a few days? So he had these nice slides, but not only did he have slides, he addressed what they needed to do, bridge the gap, and iterated. It's a long process, but ultimately what it comes down to is engaging with the team, seeing what they need to do, and then facilitating it. And then when they get more sophisticated, then you start bringing in other things. We even have something called eJIRA that we created. And instead of, what's it called? Enterprise JIRA Mail Handler? JIRA Enterprise Mail Handler, J-E-M. Yeah.
Oh, there's an acronym for this?
Yeah, J-E, yeah.
Everyone knows this but me.
So we have something like that, and we have this headless user account that can also access the client to hit JIRA. But it's kind of cool. People on an email go back and forth, solve problems, and you could even change the status of some of the fields within the email. And you could even close a ticket through the email. And what they don't know is once they closed it, their whole conversations persisted in JIRA, and they might not even known that. Kind of cool. So things like that.
That's cool. And so, Mikey, I have a question for you. And for those of you who don't know, Mikey Schott, he's one of our technical consultants. And he won't brag, but he's also co-author of the new edition of that O'Reilly book, Practical JIRA. You're laughing.
Chicken book.
It's the chicken book, we like to call it. There's a chicken on the cover. So anyway, so Mikey, this issue of governance, I think is a pretty sticky one, particularly if you're going from a small instance and you're growing, and you may or may not know you're going to be growing this thing across multiple teams or increasing user base from 500 to 2,000 over a certain period of time. So what should people be thinking about? What are you seeing with our customers?
Yeah, so I think I was out to lunch with...
See what consultants do? They go to lunch all day, write books.
Every good story starts with I was out to lunch. And we were talking about, no, that's not even true. It was a Confluence question. I must have...
You're out to lunch?
I was eating lunch and reading a Confluence question, and it basically...
You are committed.
Yeah.
Or should be.
Right, yeah, I didn't even leave my desk for lunch. And the question was basically, what's the main thing that we do as consultants here at ServiceRocket? And the consensus that we kind of came to was assist with governance, which might not be obvious when you think of what an Atlassian partner does. But ultimately, that's what it is. It's generally when we come into the picture, it's because somebody's either installed JIRA and has had the foresight to realize that this thing's very complicated, we should get somebody in here who understands this thing, or more often has started running with it and has quickly run into the problems that you encounter with JIRA. Or they've been using it for a long time and now it's, they haven't been using these types of governance policies, and it's grown sort of out of control. So the trick with governance is that it should be pervasive in your JIRA instance from installation forward throughout its entire life. It's not just about when you hit 1,000 users or 500 users. It's one of those things that the earlier that you start doing it, the better you'll be. And it's not just about performance, it's about how much work goes into administering this thing, how well does it work, how intuitive is it for users, how easily can you hand it off from one JIRA administrator to the next if you have to come in and take over the system, how well are things documented, things like that. So it's one of those things that I guess isn't natural for people to assume that it requires this much work when they first install JIRA. They aren't thinking, okay, we've installed this new software tool, let's set up our entire documentation framework and process structure around how we use it. But ultimately, that's going to be sort of the front-end loaded work that you put into developing these systems and processes and documentation that will pay off down the road.
So if I've just started using JIRA and I know someday I'll grow, I don't even know what I don't know yet. So how do I even know what to plan for? I mean, is that the right question? Because I can't even yet conceive I'm going to be a 2,000 user JIRA instance 2 years from now. I've just started.
It's tricky because it's...
Call you?
Yeah, I mean, kind of.
So let me rephrase that. What, with our customers, what have you seen that people have regretted because they made a mistake? Like, oh my gosh, if only we had done this
I've got
a year ago.
I've got it. Yeah. So the number one problem that we see that is the first major issue that companies will encounter after installing JIRA is that they will have sort of opened the floodgates and made anybody who wanted to be a JIRA administrator a JIRA administrator. And
You nailed it.
that's...
I want to be an administrator.
If you fix one problem in a JIRA instance and that's it, you've done them a world of good because, and it's, in this valley, that's kind of the mentality, right? We don't have time to figure out what we're doing, just let everybody in, let everybody use it. That's very much the mentality here, and it just does not work in the long run with JIRA. And by the long run, I mean 1 month later. It just, you have to understand basically the fundamentals about how this thing works. I mean, what it basically comes down to, and why I had trouble answering your previous question, is that JIRA is ultimately a very complicated tool. It's got a very nice user interface that you can use to set up the configurations, but the customizability that you get with JIRA comes with its complexity, and you have to treat that complexity with respect, and that means that you have to have processes around. You have to have people working in it that understand that complexity, and then you have to have processes around how you're going to use it. Especially, people run into tons of issues with not understanding that the global object in JIRA is global, so when you rename a status, that's renamed everywhere across JIRA. So that's what I would say. Core group of JIRA admins.
Don't add them all.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about that. You should probably remove me from a few groups, just saying. Okay, so I kind of want to now transition a little bit into the service delivery topic because, Dan, you said something that you've built web apps, these sort of front ends to JIRA. Essentially, you've sort of created these portals, I guess, so people can, I don't know, make requests.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you a question, then I'm going to transition to these guys. The question is, it seems like you are using JIRA sort of globally to service employees. Yeah. Is that accurate to say, or am I stretching?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I need, I don't know, if I need a virtual IP, I'll log in and I'll I'll enter in all the information I need for my VIP, and then I'll press submit, and then it goes into JIRA, and people all over the planet are doing that. And they don't even know that they're using.
Are they users, or are they not users of JIRA? They're just,
They're all users of Jira.
oh, they're users of Jira.
Yeah. So everyone can log into Jira too. So, and if you're a LinkedIn employee, the first thing that you do probably is log into Jira.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'd like to talk, Paul, you're a product marketing manager. Let's hand these over a little bit. And we can go back and forth too. You're the product marketing manager for Service Desk, right? So
Yes.
This is your baby.
Yeah.
How do you guys look at service delivery at Atlassian? I mean, beyond just the product, which I know is a high-growth product.
I'll talk bigger picture. So I'm out of our San Francisco office. I've been with Atlassian just over a year now. I come from an IT service management background, about 15 years in that space working here in the Valley. And I love Atlassian, especially being a consultant for many years and very long projects, so I appreciate the flexibility of it. Let me talk about service in kind of the bigger picture, because Atlassian's mission is to unleash the potential of every team. And our core area has been software teams. But we also are focused on IT and business teams. And there's a lot, and IT was a logical extension. And I don't know if everyone knows the history of this. We looked, and a lot of customers are using Jira for IT purposes today. And so we knew there's a lot of needs there, so that's how we've expanded. But if you think about services being delivered, I'll just talk about IT, but this goes beyond to other organizations. Services have a life cycle. So I own a service I'm going to deliver out to my end users, my customers inside of the organization. It might reach out to the business as well. I need a way to best manage that service, especially the planning, the deployment of it, all of the components that go together, and the life cycle of that, because there's probably improvements that are going to go in throughout that. And so what I'm seeing more and more is customers are actually adopting this because of the tool set of Jira, Confluence, Service Desk also fitting into that they get that ability to take that holistic approach and in a very lightweight, agile way that other approaches are more challenging. And so that's...
Yeah, so and what I find interesting too, I'd like you to comment on this, is that I think Service Desk has been the fastest growing product.
Yes.
But at the same time, there was a lot of message board stuff like, this doesn't do what we want, and yet people are buying it. So it's doing something people want.
Yeah. And I think because of the,
Yeah.
it's still the fastest growing product. I think portfolio is starting to catch up a little bit in that, but it has been. And I think because especially if you're a smaller team and you're using email and other tools, it's a win right out of the gate. Or we're seeing a lot of folks that are using heritage ITSM tools. If you think of the vendors out there, they're leaving one because of restrictions and it's not integrated with Jira, and so they're being able to move over that very quickly, and it's adaptable. And the other thing I love about the engineering team is how responsive they are to these. Right now, if you look through their list they're working on, it is directly off of issues on Jack that were raised by customers and addressing those. So I'll kind of go through some of the futures in a little while here.
Yeah, that'd be good. Greg, before joining ServiceRocket, you did a pretty big Service Desk implementation. You were telling me about at BAE Systems. So I'm interested in you sharing that story a little bit.
Okay, so I'm the token Aussie up here.
Indeed.
So I'll talk slowly. Right. So I'm a recent consultant here at ServiceRocket, and originally moved to the Bay Area. But before I came here, we were actually in that situation where we had the legacy ITSM tool and recognized that it needed to be replaced. It was completely end of life. So end of life that we had a problem one day, we went to ring the vendor, and the vendor's phone was cut off, right? That's so end of life. So, yeah, awesome. And
Not so awesome for him.
we'd really ignored, to be honest, we'd ignored the problem for a long time and knew it was going to come end of life. We'd put lots of expensive workarounds in. The desktop team had moved on to Windows 7 and IE9, and it only worked with IE8, so they put in a Citrix workaround that cost $100,000 a year, instead of actually addressing the problem, right? And I had a team of 5 who were well experienced across the Atlassian suite. And I was seeing, the company was going to market, like, they were going to go and spend $1 million to go and replace the ITSM tool with another ITSM tool, right? And I said, this is nuts. Like, we're going to stand in front of the bulldozer here and say, I think we can do it in Jira Service Desk, and we're going to get straight up 80% functionality without doing too much. And there'll be this little 10% that we'll need to do with plugins, and then the other 10% we'll have to work out does the company really want to pay for it? So we did it, and it was 4,700 customers and 250 agents, and we did it in 6 weeks. Whereas 6 weeks, whereas the other vendor options we're talking about 6 months to a year. Now, the thing that came from that though was that we had experience in using JIRA, and we had some governance in place, so we knew we could scale this thing out. But we were thinking about, like, our role as corporate IT was to really provide value to the business. And we could see that we're going to start with corporate IT, and then we're going to do HR, and then we're going to sort of conquer the world. Like, we're going to say, well, there's no reason why we can't reuse that money for finance and HR and legal and marketing. And then, but the really thing that was unexpected was products that we sold that we didn't sell with previous service contracts. We can now offer that to business. So IT fixed their problem, which was the ticketing, but it also gave the business an enabler to go and sell something. So it gave us additional revenue streams. So the $105,000 it took to implement Service Desk across all those agents fixed some things like crowd, single sign-on, and gave the development community new capability, but also gave the company a new revenue stream. And that is probably one thing that people don't necessarily think about. I think, you know, corporate IT is going to just fix their one thing. And I was only at a customer last week when we were talking about, we were doing like a deep dive in JIRA Service Desk. Like they wanted to do an evaluation, but they really wanted, you know, the warts and all, what is going to cause us problems? You know, can we throw some use cases at you and what's going to work or not? And it was when I started suggesting, well, why don't you think outside of what you can do here? Like, who is going to be your next customer? And they're thinking, well, you know, there's a Salesforce team. They've already got a JIRA project. It's like, well, there's no reason why that couldn't be a Service Desk project. And then they're kind of thinking, you know, what else they can do. So that's certainly from me. So that's my successful one.
So it couldn't have been as easy as, hey, I can do it for less. Let's do Service Desk.
No. It came down to a requirement spec and really demonstrating the core functionality. But if I look at the work we're doing here, you know, whether that was for a large defense company and doing just IT. Today I was doing a company that is using it for managing. They do storage lockers, and so they have remote sites are going to be using Service Desk. There's a company here that's just in Palo Alto that's will be implementing Service Desk. So it's not just core IT. It's other organisations that use it. So many different use cases.
So Paul, when you look across the customers of Service Desk, customers that buy it and those that don't, what are you seeing is some of the common reasons people are adopting? Like, what are they going for?
I think it's just the fast time to value. That's probably one of the ones. Sometimes it's cost, but other things just quickly being able to go live and immediately not show just one, you know, what deliver back to the business the value, but multiple. I think that I hear oftentimes being able to just deliver on what the business is expecting.
Does the business know what it wants? It seems to me that maybe the business doesn't necessarily use JIRA or is in that world. So how are they being convinced? Maybe you could chime in on this too after Greg. But
so I think it was oftentimes, especially for IT teams, they are very familiar with JIRA. And think about a medium-sized organization. They have some familiarity with JIRA because they manage it, they may interact with it, but they're not as in-depth. So when they first look at Service Desk, because they may have another solution, another approach, maybe homegrown. There is a bit of a paradigm shift that they start to see that, and once they see that this flexibility that they get, the adaptability, especially the workflow-driven aspect that they can manage their IT processes, it's very compelling in that way, and I think that's another important aspect.
how about you?
So what I usually see is that customers like it from a single service center. So whether I'm requesting something from IT or HR or finance or in the project, that they go to the one place. So there isn't the several different service centers around the company, and certainly, you know, for some parts of, like, one business unit might have access to a slightly different portal than someone else, but it's all within the same system. And so when you have people working in corporate functions, they can transfer from one to the other. It's still the same service desk, but it means that people can collaborate across those. But getting to the governance, actually, I'll tell you a little story. So 10,000 user instance of JIRA, typically used by development community. I had reasonably good governance in there about custom fields and workflows and everything, no worries. So then I've gone and said, yep, let's implement Service Desk, did that, no worries. and then did a minor upgrade, right? We've done minor upgrades, I've done minor upgrades for years, but didn't quite have some governance around Service Desk, and actually impacted Service Desk, which I thought was fine. We've had minor things before, and it's been fine, but because Service Desk touched every employee in the organisation, that actually caused a big problem. And I realised then that the use had gone from a development community which was okay with some problems every now and then if we'd missed something, but now the service touched, it touched the CEO. Like, he used Service Desk to request functionality or request services from us.
CEO free.
Well, I had a phone call, and I was like, really? Okay. I thought someone else logged it for him, but he was like, you realise that last week when I logged this call, it would take me about 10 seconds to do it. Now it's taking me like a minute. What did you do? And I said, well, we did a version upgrade. He's like, but you realise that there are people out the flight line. Like, we managed aircraft, and these aircraft was for a budget airline, and they can only work during the evenings. When the airline would land its planes in Melbourne, they'd shift it to our hangar, and then they'd work on it. And they might log a call, they're having a problem with the van, or they've had some sort of problem. And he said, well, that's going to impact their delivery schedule in the morning. I was like, so I'm kind of at the pointy end now. So what I tell people is, like, when you do something like Service Desk, it potentially has a larger impact in the organisation. But that is the things that you do as corporate IT. You want to have that impact to the business and understand the value you can add. So yeah, certainly the governance on when you use it with development, but also consider the end impact to people that's so much broader with Service Desk.
But I think the other thing I've seen, and I'm glad you touched on the portal, is it's a transformation oftentimes. Organizations that are depending upon email, because we live in email, and once a central source of point of contact back into service, whether it's IT or across the organization, becomes available, because we all have our favorite search engines. If they get used to that and they're able to go there, I think it's pretty significant. And one thing that we released this year that has seen a lot of great adoption is Smart Graph. So we learn, it's our first investment into machine learning. We keep track of what they're searching for and what they ultimately request. So that way the next person coming back, if it's a different term, we start to learn their terminology over time, so it becomes even better. And it's just, I'll talk a little more about futures, it's just our first starting point of where we want things. Because at the end of the day, if a service organization can deliver amazing service, that's right at immediate value out to the business side.
You're talking about the fields and the portal that's searching Confluence?
Yes.
That was happening.
Well, Confluence is integrated, so it's doing both. It knows what if they're ending up on knowledge or they're actually getting to their request, their form they're going to fill out, which service desk, and that to them they don't know that that's maybe 100 service desks behind the scene, different 100 projects.
So I want to remind you guys, give you guys a chance to ask questions now too, if you have any. Or remind you that if you think of one in a few minutes, you can ask. Does anyone have any? Okay.
I've got a question about the LinkedIn deployment. How many,
Okay.
did you have to do a lot of custom plugins that were able to do plugins that were coming out of the community, or?
Yeah, ton of plugins. So the answer is yes. Yeah, we have quite a few plugins. The governance around that, so one thing that I would want to convey is that whether it's a configuration, code, or a plugin, treat JIRA like you're developing a product. Have a stage, have a UAT, bring in users once you do an upgrade, once you create a plugin, make sure you get their sign off, this is the look and feel. If you can, do some type of performance characterization and extrapolate. It's pretty easy to do like a single user test, grepping logs and finding the user and figuring out how many calls a click does and just thinking about it and understanding if it's heavy. So things like that. But yeah, we do have tons of plugins. Our biggest, is JIRA Agile even considered a plugin, or is it an offering? It's more of an offering. Well, it is in JIRA 7.
It's standalone.
Okay, yeah, we're
It
on
was a
6.4,
plugin itself,
so-
standalone JIRA software.
Yeah. So, but we do have tons.
And you? I have a question.
Mine was still a question of, how many plugins, because the JIRA that I have is actually a very small set of people, and I already have about 10 plugins for the customization that I need. For something like 10,000 users as well.
Yeah.
How many plugins do you have?
Oh boy, Christian, how many do you think we have? Like it's like
Too
8
many to
scrolls
count.
with the mouse. It's like or like a page down like 13 times. It's a lot. Yeah, and it's concerning when you look at it, but if you look at some of the plugins, they feel like some of the plugins are some functionality you just expect from JIRA, and some of them are rolled into the new offering too. When you look at like the 3 pillars that you have, a lot of the plugins in like JIRA 7 and stuff, I think are rolled in. So what version are you on? Yeah, so when you get to like 7, they have it a lot, I'd say, cleaner, where they bake in these plugins into the offering and make it a lot easier for you, from what I've seen. But we've gone on a long journey with JIRA, so we have tons of plugins. And I don't know what it would be like if we upgraded to 7, but I'd imagine a lot of them go away. And for better or for worse, right? So some of your favorite ones get rolled into a pillar that you don't necessarily want to go in for whatever reason. Or discontinued, yeah. Yeah, especially when you rely on it. It's so hard to take away functionality from users because they've based their whole business on it, right?
How many add-ons do you have in your little instance? Almost 20, yeah.
So, and the other question I have is that Jira Agile, when you have sprint, you don't need to give people a lot of permissions. Like every project, I mean, people can do all the projects that they want to put on the board. How do you manage that?
Yeah, so what we did at the beginning is this one was tough. We had to acquiesce, and we had to give them global project admin role for any like project manager or scrum lead. And it ends up being a little bit unruly, and that's probably one place I'm a little bit nervous about because we continue to do it, but it was untenable for us. Like every day they'd say, hey, I can't start my sprint. Well, why? Oh, wow, a new business unit came up, then they created a project, they rolled it into our sprint, I tried to click it, I can't, and we knew it over and over again. We thought about coding a solution where it kind of figures this out and it does something smart, but it just wasn't worth it. And when you look at global project admin, they could only do damage sort of kind of locally. Like if you're looking at JIRA as a planet, they'll only mess up their country, where I'm trying to keep the world. I don't know.
You can add versions that you don't want them to, so you can't really customize.
Yeah, absolutely. But we took that hit, and then the governance is scary because sometimes you just end up acquiescing so that you could scale and they could do their job too, and you don't want to slow people down. So we did take that risk, and we know about it. Nothing's happened yet, but I'd imagine something will.
Before you move forward, in JIRA 7, they've added a managed sprint permission specifically for that. But if you're still on 6.3, then yeah, it's a common issue. And I think that a lot of those project changes, I'm not sure about versions, but I'm fairly certain about component changes that they show up in the audit log. So if you do need to go back and see if there's a risk that you have to slap, who was it?
So, I know the size of JIRA, scaling JIRA can be very, very painful. How do you scale service that with the able to manage JIRA?
Well, it's, as far as the new version goes, because being standalone, it will follow the same model of JIRA software, JIRA Service Desk. And it's just a matter of coming up with your plan of how you'll structure your teams. Will it be just initially IT starting out and then expand to other service teams? And then what do we classify? I was with a very large enterprise customer in Europe, and they've drawn the lines of, okay, you're working on back-end processy JIRA tasks. I'm going to give you the ability to interact with IT or maybe back-end IT because you're helping and working together of how we collaborate. But they've drawn the lines of who is actually going to be an agent that's delivering service and who is just using JIRA across the organization. I think that's really, this goes back to governance, is really a key at the very beginning, because another customer was with earlier last year, they kind of let it wild, wild west, and they've run into just having to pull things back when they realized they were consuming more service desk licenses than they really needed to give out to people. But good question on that. I'm glad you asked that.
There are about about 10 minutes or less for the panel part, so what other questions do you guys have before I
Did Dan have something back
ask
there? I
more?
saw him move.
Yeah,
Oh,
cool.
okay.
You have a question? Yeah, because I wanted to
Yeah.
know about the future of service desk too,
no,
so.
and I actually, yeah, I'll repeat some things that were actually talked about at Atlas Camp, and then I kind of know what's on roadmap more immediate and then kind of some longer term thinking. One of the things, how many are in here are using Service Desk? I was like, okay, awesome. And then how many are cloud? And how many are server? Okay, all right, very good. Well, one of the things coming out of Atlas Camp, and I encourage you, if you did get a chance, watch the keynote from our CTO. It was great, really good. 600 folks attended. I was just in Barcelona. It was a great conference. Looking at the ecosystem is growing in the way that we can integrate. And there's a lot of love being shown both to server and to cloud. So there were some great announcements out of there. One of the things that we talked about is the API. The API opened up as a standalone product. One of our heads of PM for that was on stage. We've now opened up, you can get to the SLAs from the API, and the portal, and I forget, there's some other areas that you can come in and now start placing your content around in there. So I think it's been kind of people have been asking how to be able to better integrate, and you're going to see a lot more of that as we especially get closer to Summit. I know of a lot of vendors out there building integrations, so that's one. The other area is I don't know how many are using ITIL, but it's important. ITIL is a great standard. It's a gold standard for many IT teams. And so we've now passed certification on 4 of the processes. We picked the top 4 that our customers were concerned about. And it was really interesting, the examiner that went through it, he's seen all the other legacy vendors and he's like, wow, this is really different, a different approach. So to hear that from him was great. And so I think that's just a great milestone. Some things we've recently shipped. Now we ship to cloud and then the server comes a little bit after that. But we've done the approvals, both on the front end. As a consultant for many years, approvals are always challenging. I love the way we've done this tied to the workflow. And now we're going to be able to use the automation. So that's the next part coming. Knowledge base. So we consume it on the front end. Customers love it because they're searching like they're in Google and they're finding it. We now, when you're in a ticket, this just shipped just recently, this 2 weeks ago, last week, agents will now see knowledge base recommendations. So when I see a ticket, I'm going to see these things. In the way that you can interact with them, they can say, hey, you submitted this ticket. Maybe you missed it. Take a look at this, and I can send it back in a comment to them. So they just simply click it. It goes in the information going back to the customer, and now we're able to maybe drive that further to reduce the ticket. Or they may see something, and this is a next phase, is something that's internal. And there's ways we can control it today, but we're going to make that even easier. One investment we're going to make there in knowledge is really critical. So we're adding enhancements on the reports. So that way we know if I have thousands and thousands of knowledge-based articles, who's consuming them, who's using them. So we're going to give you good analytics on what's being used, and then beyond that, on the roadmap right now is we're going to start telling you what people are searching for from the portal. Here's where you should write knowledge and invest in that. So I think that's going to make that aspect of it even more valuable. The other area, because we know a lot of our customers use this for internal, it's like customer to customer support. I build something and it goes out to my customers, and I need that data. And that's been a challenge. We are investing in customer org data management, and that is actually in development right now. By the time we'll get later in the year, you'll start to hear more about it. So we're going to make it much easier for you to be able to manage customer org data and then leverage that data, or possibly even integrate that data. The other area is around Smart Graph, as I mentioned. We've made the investment on the portal, and they've now started to branch that out into other aspects. So that's the machine learning of what we are able to gather, both from the customer side, but also what's going on with what's the agent doing. There's some valuable insights that are going to be important to both IT and service teams. And then finally, just analytics, being able to get really valuable information back out. And the one area that I saw a couple of the vendors is being able to plug in my analytics that's important, whether it's I'm using Loggly, Splunk, some of these other analytics tools on being able to quickly resolve incidents. You'll see more of those vendors starting to come up. And then the last one I'll mention is webhooks. This is already there today. They're expanding on it. The PM that was speaking at Atlas Camp, what we want to do is we know that you have other systems that you want to basically get into. Customers love the automation capability. It's simply, they don't have to script. I go in and say, if I trap this, this condition, I'm going to go and act on it. Right now, today, it's pretty much contained in service desk. We've added webhooks. We're going to open up even further, and the API actually opens up. But if you want to write your own webhook, your own custom webhook, you can now leverage that from service desk. So webhooks are going to grow as we move over time. So integration to the ecosystem becomes very, very critical now that it's a standalone product. Any questions on that?
Yeah, any questions about that? Jesse in the back, and then
Yes. Yeah, they're opening that up, and the details of where they're going to, I think it's the number one requested issue on Jack. It's number one and number two. Those are the ones they're focused on right now, and the details of that. I don't have all of the specific details, but it is right now that they're working through that and how that will fit together. But being able to then integrate in the way that you want to pull that data is very, very important.
and you.
Question, please. Yeah, good question. So I don't know of any changes on pricing. In fact, they lowered the price on Service Desk when we went to JIRA Service Desk 3 when JIRA 7 came out, which is great because JIRA is automatically included. What I always go back to is who is managing that request? And oftentimes it's an IT team or it's a service request for HR or finance. And so instead of just deploying, because it's the JIRA mindset is everyone has access to JIRA. And I understand that, and it's a bit of a paradigm shift because these folks are managing a very specific process, and so that's where I would look at, I would want to give them that license and then look at, do the others out there need the service desk license? Maybe, maybe not. And that's kind of the litmus test right now. Change into the pricing model, I have no insight into that, so I wouldn't have anything that I could share on that. But definitely assessing and allocating those licenses, because it is different that we're used to just giving everyone a JIRA license. And
Yeah, if you have huge engineering, engineering doesn't fix services, for example.
Yes.
But we have another department that do need services. And we're not buying it because we have to buy it for engineering. For engineers, we don't really use it.
one customer I saw recently, they had a use case where engineers using it. They had a smaller set in engineering because it was part of their release team, and they were kind of a bridge over from IT ops. They deployed Service Desk for about a group of 20, 30 people, and they are managing all of their incidents, their problem investigations, because they were doing some of those issues over the long term. And so they were the primary interface between IT on the other side, which I don't remember what ITSM vendor they were using, and back into JIRA software.
Was that one JVM or was that two? When you say deployed, was it like a separate JVM, they log in there? and
No,
then you had to
it
know-
was one instance. They had JIRA software and JIRA Service Desk in one instance. Yeah.
Okay.
So, apparently I've given up talking. So just to be clear, you can price, or you can set up service desks so that only the people who need licenses have them. So if you've got an engineering team of, let's say, 500 people, and you've got 25 people in another project that need to be using service desk, you can just use a 25-user service desk license. I think, based on the way that you guys are describing it, you should be able to license them separately.
Yeah.
Actually, just our little store, our little marketing team, we have 15-user JIRA license, but we also have Service Desk, and we only have a 3-user license for Service Desk. There's 3 people on the marketing team taking the Service Desk request to fix bugs and to fix. So it depends. So you know that more about than I do, but I mean we only do 3 people in Service Desk agents, and the rest don't need to be a JIRA user. Okay, so any more questions? I have one more question for each of the panelists, and then we'll have another beer. Okay, so I'm going to put you guys on the spot because people want to come to these things and actually learn something, and you guys did a good job. So, but I want to know from each of you, and anyone can volunteer. So, what is one thing you'd recommend people look for and avoid doing so they don't get into trouble? This is particularly important in this whole governance issue. You know, you get to this point where, oh my gosh, if I had only known this then. What's one thing you could recommend to everyone if you only knew then what you know now? Mikey's looking at me just like I got said.
One of my favorites is always, if you're using Kanban boards for non-software teams, you should change the board sub-filter. Does anybody know this problem? Okay, so does somebody here have a Kanban board with like 1,000 issues on it that just performs very slowly?
Dude.
Okay, and what did you do, Alan? Close, yeah. Yeah, so maybe nobody's having this problem, but it's one of those things that I see a lot. So the default setting for a Kanban board in JIRA is that it filters out based on versions. So if you're using a Kanban board and nobody's using versions, the easiest way to do it, a Kanban board comes with a thing called a sub-filter. So instead of making the sub-filter version-based, you make it resolution-based. So it sounds complicated, but it's a really common problem. It occurs very often, and the solution is pretty easy once you understand it.
So I have a Kanban board. Can you look at mine? Okay. Anyone else? Who wants to go next? Come on.
Yeah, so I see this time and time again. Decide on what directory is going to be your directory for users going forward. All right, so whether that's going to be AD or Crowd or a JIRA user server, because we often come across customers where they've got multiple directories that now got username overlaps. So if you're going to eventually scale out, decide on what it's going to be and where it's going to be. And that will get particularly important if you do service desks, because you want to have people who've got access to JIRA also having access to Confluence in a seamless way, so things like the knowledge base articles will work. You'll get the full benefits of that.
Yeah.
So throw something in front of your JIRA JVM and make sure that you have instrumentation for logging. Make sure that you know who's doing what on your system so that you can take action. It's the most frustrating thing when someone's hitting your instance and you don't know where to go or who to talk to. So make sure that you have IP addresses and even the username persisted so that you could search for it and you can make sense of what might be taking your resources. It helps a lot. Also, if you do have TAM support, like engage them. Dan Radigan, we meet weekly and he's immensely helpful. So if you do have access to Atlassian experts, like ask them anything and they're very, very helpful.
Okay, very good. Paul?
The one I'll throw out there real quick is I've seen just recently, and it repeats itself, is when I'm implementing Confluence with Service Desk, is plan that hierarchy of where knowledge will be structured as more and more projects are added, because I've seen that it just becomes challenging the way that they just keep adding in and don't think about the structure that they want to follow. And I was with a large customer that they backed themselves into that as they kept adding more and more different.
Reorganizing that content afterwards must be a nightmare.
Yeah.
By the reaction. Okay, great. Well, thank you guys for being up here and taking the heat. Yeah. And thank you for joining us. There's still some food and drinks left, so feel free to network and hang out a little while and talk to, get these guys in the corner and drill them. I was easy on them. All right, thanks guys.